Good. Welcome back to everyone. We now come to that very important topic of tourism, and I've called this topic Breaking the Mold, New Directions for Tourism. And I believe we have a wonderful team, a very senior academic in Professor Jan van der Borg, who manages to teach both at the Foscari University in Venice and at the Catholic University in Leuven. And we had a very pleasant talk about a week ago, which I much appreciated. You will see, if you look at his biography, his great interest is in the economic dimension of tourism, which is, of course, a vital aspect of it. He has many publications to his credit. And as I told him the other day, several times when I mentioned that I had asked him to speak while I was in Venice recently, the response was, "What a good choice. What an excellent man he is." So I thought that was really wonderful. And I'm looking forward very much, Jan, to what you have to say. And then I will briefly afterwards introduce our other two speakers, Monica Cesarato and Luisella Romeo. And I think the three of you together will put across a really interesting picture. And I'm much looking forward to it. So Jan, over to you.
Yeah, thank you very much, Peter, also for your compliments. Let me just tell all the present people in the seminar how delighted I am that you managed to put together so many different speakers with different backgrounds, with just one, I think, common characteristic, that they're all working on Venice with a lot of passion, actually. So I'm really sort of congratulating you and the others with this really interesting thing. It's also a very timely, I think, conference, because indeed, as you were already suggesting, and as we already told each other before this conference, Venice now indeed is in a let's say, luxury kind of position, that because of the pandemic, some parts of the economy, especially the tourism economy, have gone in some kind of temporary kind of from reflection moment. I think we actually have the opportunity now to get some grip on some of the issues that have been bothering Venice quite a lot the past decades. But there might now be a chance, because of this breathing pause, that we can just look through a number of alternatives we have to make Venice more livable, and to actually sort of address some of the questions also Jane has been mentioning before, of what actually is Venice going to be in 20, 30 years? For whom are we going to change Venice, actually? And who actually sort of has the right to claim that Venice is there for them, for him or her in the first place? I think if we look at the interaction between Venice's past, present and future, tourism, of course, is a very important dimension of all the different sort of issues that Venice has to tackle. I mean, I just think about the cruise ships that we mentioned quite a lot of times. It's not only a generator of tourism, it's not only a generator of environmental kind of problems, but it's also very much intertwined with what we actually want the Laguna to be for Venice, and not only for Venice, but also for the Veneto region, and maybe for humanity as such, as Jane seemed to be suggesting. So I'm really glad that I can sort of share some of my ideas that have been indeed, as you called me, senior kind of academic, which is a very nice classification. Some of the thoughts that I've been working on a couple of years, and see whether some of the thoughts might indeed be useful for rethinking Venice's future and making Venice a much more sustainable place to live and work in, which is actually, I think, the main challenge that each of us should be working on. And I know some of the panelists are working on, but it's also very much in the spirit of John Ruskin's work that actually has this sort of bit, let's say, strange title, because it suggests that it's very much about the stones of Venice, but in the end, as you were already saying, Peter, before, that is not actually the case. His work has been very much about the people behind these stones. And that is actually, I think, one of the main lessons that we should be taking home today, is that also tourism development is about the people in a positive, but also in a very negative way. And if we are not careful, and that is actually sort of the worst case scenario that I have in mind, if we're not careful, also tourism is contributed to a sort of a future in which the city of Venice is very much about the stones, but not so much about the people that actually sort of are represented or feel represented about the stones, that Venice actually sort of still possesses in a splendid and magnificent way. But let me just show you more or less what tourism in Venice has been looking like before the pandemic, before 2020. I'm going to take you also in this very short slot that I have at my disposition to some of the, let's say, mechanisms, theoretical issues, the mechanisms that have led to Venice becoming an icon of over-tourism, to Venice becoming an icon of a touristic monoculture. And then I would like to just to discuss some of the ideas that have been maturing now during this pandemic, of whether Venice indeed sort of learned some lesson from this pandemic, or whether Venice is going to race back as soon as possible to a pre-pandemic kind of business model, tourism business model, that actually is promising to make matters worse rather than better. Now, if we just see and look at how Venice developed over the past 5 or 6 decades, then it becomes very clear that in terms of numbers, tourism has been growing very quickly and very also aggressively since the 80s, more or less, and up till the year of 2019, in which Venice was supposed to be visited by about 13 million people, of which only about 25% were staying in the historical center of Venice, and the other 75% came from a lot of different places, from Croatia, from the south of Germany, from the rest of Italy, from Austria, Switzerland, on a sort of per day basis. We have called them actually the excursionists, or the Venetians call them sort of i visitatori mordi e fuggi, those who just get a bite out of Venice and then escape. Now, if you look at these numbers and you put that into some kind of a perspective with the 50,000 people that remain in the historical center as inhabitants, and of course also a lot of other city users, of course the question pops up of whether this number is because we call this over tourism, an excess of tourism pressure. Also, in that case, you need kind of a reference point to which this 13 million of visitors needs to be, let's say, measured. And this is something that we have been doing in the past. We have developed some kind of a very simplistic linear regression model, so that we could sort of make at least some kind of guess or an estimation of Venice's carrying capacity with respect to all these visitors. And in the end, we found that there was an update made in 2019 that Venice could easily manage some 20 million people per year, of which only 45% would have been excursionists or sort of day tourists, and 55% residential tourists, people staying, sleeping in Venice in some kind of accommodation, including bed and breakfast. In other words, as you can imagine very, very well, that there's 10 million visitors too much with respect to the, we could call the optimal number of visitors to Venice. And not only is there a sort of a quantitative discrepancy between sort of what actually Venice can manage and the number of people that visits Venice per year, but there's also a qualitative kind of mismatch. There's too many excursionists and not enough residential visitors, those who stay in Venice for the day, because of course it's evident that excursionists not only contribute less per day and per person to Venice's economy, but they're also responsible for most of the what we call negative externalities, like pollution, congestion, and so forth. In other words, if you would base a tourism development strategy, sustainable tourism development strategy, on these kind of numbers, there are sort of two important, let's say, inputs for such a strategy. First of all, you have to get rid of some of the visitors that actually come to Venice at the moment, pre-pandemic. And secondly, you have to requalify tourism demand towards a more sort of sustainable, but also a quality intrinsic kind of visit, which are in our sort of vision, especially those who are staying in hotel accommodations within the historical center. Now, our model not only sort of focus very much on the negative externalities, on the fact that there are a lot of sort of facilities and public spaces that are actually overused by the visitors, and therefore take away space and opportunities for example, other than touristic activities, economic activities, but also social activities like housing or just strolling around in Venice itself. But it is only and also a question, which is sort of the negative side of the tourism development thing, but it is also obvious that a future of Venice cannot be sort of perceived without tourism. I mean, there should always be, Venice has a very particular economy. It is unthinkable that any sort of Venice in the future, any living Venice, could do without tourism at all. So I think what you actually should be looking for is a clever, a smart, a sustainable balance between making Venice a visit by excursionists and especially residential tourists, but also keep a check on the balance between tourism and the rest of Venice's functions. It is obviously performing. Now, if we look at the mechanisms that actually led to unsustainability of tourism development, and here there again, as we will see in a few minutes, is a link with something that Jane has already said: the lack of agency, the lack of a sort of a clear governance structure of actually sort of institutions responsible for dealing with all these matters. The concept that actually I would like to refer to, which is a theoretical concept, but I think it's very useful to understand actually what is going wrong in Venice, is a sort of a concept coming from environmental economics, and that is the idea of the tragedy of the commons by Harding, just a few decades ago, published in Science. If you have a common good, a public good, and of course destinations are full with examples of public goods, whether it's squares, Piazza San Marco, or the streets, or or the facilities that are sort of constructed and also exploited and also sort of maintained for the local population. If you think about Venice as a public good, a place, a destination where there are no clear rules for how these public facilities have to be used and by whom, then you end up with a situation in which individual interests are actually sort of making use of this public good by adding just year by year an extra claim on these public goods, so that in the end it becomes like Harding was already sort of foreseeing, like the cattle on a small field of grass, which is used by the different sort of people, different parts of the community, in such a way that in the end sort of this grass field is being destroyed completely. So for me, the issue, the main problem of Venice, as far as tourism development is concerned, is that indeed sort of the core, the heart of the tourism product of Venice is made up by commons, by public amenities, by public space, by public infrastructure, which has no actually sort of blueprint for how this, and that's the absence of the strategy and of the agency, as Jane was already proposing, with actually no blueprint of how, until what extent and by whom these commons should be used. And that is actually sort of, for me, the cause of most of the problems that Venice has actually experienced with over tourism. Now, I think the pandemic, to a certain extent, made most of these problems quite clear, because also I think the idea of a monoculture being very dependent on the economic or health or other kind of issues actually shown how sensitive and how vulnerable Venice is when it comes to these kind of sort of disruptive changes in the global conditions that allow people to travel or keep people at home, because Venice indeed sort of very abruptly was falling into a sort of deep social and economic black hole from March 2020 and onwards. So indeed, sort of this vulnerability, which is partly linked to this over-tourism and unsustainable development sort of parcours, became very clear. Now, this was, of course, generated an overall reflection, not only in Venice, but in many other places, of what could sort of tourism become after the pandemic. And my first indicators of the sentiment of both visitors and also of the tourism industry at large, both in Venice but also externally, was that there is at the moment a very, very strong urge, a strong drive, both within the tourism market, as far as the demand side is concerned, travelers, and within the tourism industry, to get back to where we were as soon as possible. In other words, no build back better kind of idea, but business as usual, rather than indeed taking profit of this moment of breathing pause, of this moment of reflection, to see whether some of the let's say the bad sides, the dark sides of tourism development become tackled by a sort of a new strategy towards a new sort of kind of business model for tourism that is both more sustainable, both more accessible, but also sort of more inclusive. Now, if we are looking about this dark side of tourism, I think there's a lot of sort of issues that actually sort of compensate for the fact that indeed tourism is an engine for economic development, for the generation of GDP, and a sort of motor for job creation. We cannot ignore that. I mean, it would be stupid to demonize tourism completely. I think tourism could be something positive, but of course managed in a certain way. Now, one of the biggest costs, social and economic costs of tourism development, when it's not regulated, when there's no strategy behind this development process, is that it actually suffocates the social, the regular, the normal social and economic activities that any living city should be performing. It should be a place where people can find a house, where they can play in the public spaces that actually the city possesses. It should be a place where, just to say, the stones should have a very vibrant and very dynamic soul. Now, tourism has been taken, because it's excessive, because the pressure is too big with respect to the carrying capacity of the tourist carrying capacity of the place. Tourism has actually been suffocating these kind of functions. And one of the, let's say, the indicators of this excessive pressure indeed is the number of people that lives in Venice, that is actually declining now for a couple of decades. And one might ask him or herself whether these 50,000 people that remain in Venice offer enough critical mass, enough purchasing power also for a number of non-touristic economic and social activities to be maintained also in the future. So for me, not doing anything against this unlimited and unsustainable tourism development actually sort of puts a very strong burden on the future of Venice. On the future of Venice, that actually should be a future in which Venice is a living city, a diverse city, a city with a number of different economic and social activities that contribute to its economic base. And that brings me to the last part of this lecture, of course, if we go on, if we continue with this sort of pre-pandemic kind of development, I'm certain that the numbers will rise, will continue to rise. I'm certain that because of a sort of a relative lack of tourism accommodation in the historical center, and of course that has to be matched with, as Jane was saying, with the number of dwellings that Venice actually is offering, because you cannot expand the accommodation sector infinitely. We're already, I think, in a situation which we have too much space dedicated to tourism and not so much to inhabitants, to live in Venice, to play, to work in Venice. But we should sort of stop this process and find an alternative, let's say, business model for tourism development, which actually I think has two very important dimensions, this new strategy. First of all, I think in Venice we should start to be very, very aware of the fact that it's not in the numbers that Venice lives with tourism and lives from tourism. I think we should really sort of stop with celebrating increasing numbers of visitors. We should sort of really talk about the quality. It should be a quality first kind of strategy in which the numbers have no importance. On the contrary, which the numbers should be readdressed, should even decline, yet with a sort of net impact, net social, economic and environmental footprint that is actually much better per person, per day that Venice is being visited. Secondly, and I think this is also a very important characteristics of this new strategy, is that the most important stakeholder of tourism development is not the tourism industry, is not the visitor, but is the inhabitant of Venice. I think there should be a refocusing of the strategy in a way that tourism development is not a means to an end, but in which it's a recipe to make the city more attractive for its inhabitants at first, and for local economic activities in the first place. Now, we are very far from such a strategy. And my fear is that because of this pandemic lasting now, the situation for already 2 years, because of the crisis in Eastern Europe, the war in Ukraine and so forth, the push from the tourism industry, but also from the tourists themselves, to get back as soon as possible to the business as usual kind of scenario, can only be countered when from the public side, from the management of Venice at large, which is not only a case of the local administration, the regional administration. I think it's also a very good thing that the national government has been interested persistently now in this matter. The only way to counter these I think even sort of justified pressures from the tourism industry and from the tourists, from the tourism market, are by sort of putting a very innovative, very disruptive with respect to the old business model in place as soon as we can, before sort of tourism demand starts to catch up and to get into Venice in a couple of months' time. Now, this strategy is missing. Venice is increasingly becoming a theme park, but alas, it's a theme park without the management that, for example, the theme parks in Orlando or Shanghai are having. And actually that for me is the issue that should be addressed very importantly. Who actually is going to take care of brokering, of implementing this new strategy, but most of all, also this new business model that makes tourism development in Venice much more sustainable, much more inclusive, and also much more interesting for the local population at large. I've been talking about this quite a long time, and most of my academic career, we started working on sustainable tourism development in Venice in the end of the 80s, more or less. And fortunately, as some of you were already sort of suggesting, Venice has become a laboratory, some kind of a sort of an example kind of case, a showcase for the sort of the nasty effects that excessive tourism demand and touristic pressure and development can have on a sort of vital, vibrant place. So most of my work now is consulting places like Amsterdam and Barcelona and Bruges. And I have to say that it's quite disappointing how the city of Venice itself is actually snobbing the ideas that many of us actually have been putting forward. But maybe that might be changing in a short time. I would like to stop here. It's very surprising how difficult it is to speak in English for such a sort of qualified public. At the beginning, I had some difficulty with that, but I hope that my colleagues in the panel and the questions will be giving me a good opportunity to get back on track. So thank you, Peter, again for also for all the work that you've been doing. For me, this conference is really, really, really interesting. Just also and alone by the fact that you really succeeded in putting together a lot of different people with a lot of different sort of backgrounds, but with maybe one very warm idea about this place. Thank you again.
Thank you very much. Simon and I feel that probably we'll have a better discussion if we have questions and discussion after all three of you have spoken. It's by happy chance, I think you're very complementary to one another. in various ways. So let's try that anyway. So I'll briefly introduce both Monica and Luisella, and then we'll have a debate. But anyway, I would like to say how much I enjoyed meeting both of them. Monica was the first person we met in Venice on the morning after our arrival on our recent visit. And we had one of those happy moments when on a bridge, we each realized that she must be Monica and she realized we must be Peter and Ross. So as you will see from her biography, she's had a rich experience of tourism in various ways. And I just will read out one little bit. I've come to realize that the main problem of Venice, and we all long to know what that is, which causes over-tourism and all the consequences that flow from it, is a lack of basic knowledge by the majority of people who come to visit. Extraordinary, isn't it? But I'm sure there's a lot of truth in that. And then I hope Luisella was pleased that I quoted her in my own introductory remarks. But when I read her biography, I just thought it was so telling and so beautiful, the way she put the positive side of things. And in meeting them both, I became conscious of what a lot of ideas they had, how to do things better. So let's hand over first to Monica, please.
Hi, everybody.
And then to Luisella.
Hi, everybody. Thank you so much, Peter and the Guild of St. George, for having me, even though I'm still wondering what I'm doing here, because with all this academic and people talking, I'm just feel like I'm the little nobody, but I'll just give my little two pieces. Also, I just wanted to thank Ian, because he literally just said everything I felt for so many years and I couldn't express. So it was like, oh my God, finally somebody will say what I've been trying to tell people all of these years. I feel very honored for having been asked to share my voice on Venice and to be included in this group. I'm only a blogger, so I don't study tourism, I actually do tourism. So my piece is about my own experiences, what I've come to realize since 2008, when I've been doing food tours and doing cooking lessons with to tourists, mainly English speakers, not necessarily from England, but in general English speakers. And I would like to tackle a problem that for me is the basis of all the other problems. And that is the lack of education and knowledge from the visitors when they arrive into the city. And since I'm basically a problem solver, I wanted to talk about something that everybody can really help, because this is something we can all do, not just bloggers and journalists, but everybody. Okay, so I come to realize that, of course, this lack of education and knowledge on the city translated also in three main things. First of all, people only wanted to stay in Venice for 1 or 2 nights. And that obviously missing out on discovering the real Venice, but also creating big problems economically, because when somebody only stays for 1 night or 2 nights, they don't really invest in the city. So that was creating big problems for the artisan, for the restaurants, even museum in a certain way. Second, it created a problem with people not respecting the city and its residents, with bad behavior towards the monuments and towards the Venetians. We all learned about people cooking in the middle of St. Mark's Square with little stoves, or people using, not using the public toilets, but using corners of Venice to do their own things. And this has happened, has been filmed, we've taken pictures, we all seen it happening. So this is something that showed a total lack of respect towards the city. And I think this is caused by the lack of, ignorance from the point of view of people. And also, this lack of knowledge, it meant that people treat Venice just like fast food. As Ia was saying, mordi e fuggi, a little bite and off to the next city, because in Venice, what can you do? There is nothing to do really in Venice. 1 day is enough. This is the general knowledge. I'm not talking about people that have been coming here for years and years and years and staying for 2 weeks, a month or so on. I'm talking about your 90% of people that come to Venice. So my intervention today is about the importance of educating the travelers before they come, and to convince people to stay more than the usual 48 hours. There is a very famous saying, a Venetian saying that says, andar pal mondo descanta, ma se ti parti mona, te torni mona. That in Venetian means traveling the world opens your mind, but if you depart as an idiot, you come back as an idiot. What it means, in my opinion, is that just because you decide to go and visit a city or a place in your life, doesn't mean that when you get there, you understand it and appreciate it if you haven't done your research before. Until 30 years ago, pretty everybody, we used to, before going on holiday, it was well planned. You used to have your travel guides. You used to spend maybe 6-7 months before going to the place, understanding what you wanted to see. Nowadays, because we got internet, we think, oh, I'll just sort myself out when I get there, and I'm pretty sure I'll find some information when I get there. So many times when I do my food tours, many people choose to do them on the first day, and the first thing they ask me is, where do you recommend us to go? What is there to see in Venice? And I'm looking at them like thinking, didn't you know this before you left? Don't you know that there is much more than St. Mark's and Rialto? You know, this is a city that offers so much cultural offers, but not just cultural. You got so many experiences that you can do that even if you don't like cultures, you can, you know. So I decided to talk about 3 important things. First, how important it is to know about a place before you go. Well, first of all, it's important because it helps you discover the hidden gems of your destination. A city like Venice offers more than 100 churches, more than 40 between museum, galleries, exhibitions. God knows how many experiences between rowing, cooking, paper mask making, and God knows how many new things nowadays you can do. And all of a sudden people arrive and they do go to Rialto, to San Marco, to the Doge's Palace, and that's the end of their day. And it's so sad. Just to give you an example, I used to run a bed and breakfast many years ago. And I met somebody that said, oh yeah, this is my 2nd time that I come to Venice because, you know, the first time I came, I thought it was very modern. Which I went a bit like, excuse me, very modern. And what's happening? The lady, instead of getting off at the train station in the center of Venice, got off at Mestre. As soon as she got off, she saw the area around the train station that we all know is not exactly pretty. And she packed her bag and went back because she thought that was Venice. That was lack of research, of course, because if she did the proper research, she would have known that she got off at the wrong train station and that wasn't Venice. Because as we all know, when you get off a train station in Venice, first thing you have a beautiful view of a church of San Samuele and San Simeone. And it's, you know, beautiful. Another thing that is very important, it helps you to understand and appreciate the different culture. By listening and talking to the local people, you learn the fabric of a society. You learn I don't call it the differences, I would call it the things that makes you similar. So instead of looking for what's different in a country, you should, before leaving, look at what is similar to your country. That way it's easier also to get in. I always say people arrive and they get upset that they cannot go into a church because they got mini skirts and they got a vest on. Well, all you had to do was reading before and you would have known this. It's just a question of respect. Also, doing the research helps you to avoid places or avoid scammers. Obviously, we all know that in Venice there are no bad places. We're very lucky in the sense that the whole city is fairly safe and is beautiful. But it helps you to understand if you want to book in the mainland, if you want to book in the main city, if it's okay for you to book on the Lido, on the Giudecca, because that helps you as well. Maybe not to arrive at midnight or 1 o'clock in the morning and all of a sudden realizing that you have got no way to go to your hotel. This is all research that is done before. And It allows you also to make knowledgeable choices. We all have preferences of where we like to go on holiday. Not everybody likes to go to the seaside. Not everybody likes to go to the mountains. The same with a city. Not everybody likes museums, churches, and culture. So if you learn beforehand what the destination offers, you might change your mind and not go to the destination, which for Venice will be a good thing, because unfortunately, a lot of people come over expecting to find the wildlife, nightlife with cocktails and whatever. And of course, Venice is not there. Venice is a city where you come and just relax and take your time, and you have to walk a lot, and there are a lot of bridges. So this helps you also, you know, preparing yourself and do research helps you plan better also your travel, because of course, if you know that there are so many museums, so many things to see, you obviously automatically realize that you cannot do it in 2 days. So what is the role that we have got, bloggers, journalists, and the medias in general, and the tour operators, to entice people to want to stay here longer? Well, researchers have concluded that motivation to visit a destination is highly correlated to information available on social media. And the effective image in regard of a holiday destination is influenced by the cognitive image created by social media interaction. In other words, I show you a beautiful picture, I want to go there. Okay, the problem is that we all showing beautiful pictures of Venice, but sometimes we're not showing the right beautiful pictures of Venice. What do I mean? There's bloggers out there, journalists out, well, we were talking about before, journalists giving a bit of a doomed and gloomy reports of Venice in the last few years that don't always show the real Venice, because even just after the flood of 2019, all the video makers wanted to do was about the Venetians on their hands and knees and crying, when instead the Venetians were on their hands and knees pulling themselves together. And within a couple of weeks, they were, you know, the city was back to the way it's supposed to have been. But even now, I still get people writing and asking me to talk about the 2019 floods, when instead, shall we talk about the future and how the people coped and what they did to get out of a situation. Another thing that a lot of bloggers do, they just come to Venice, take the beautiful pictures on the side of the canal, eating a pizza on the floor. Is that the image that we want? Not really. That's not the image of Venice. That's not something you do. So we have, I think we have the duty to promote the right Venice. If an influencer can convince somebody to buy, they can convince millions of people to buy a certain product, why can't we use social media to show how Venice should be visited? Let's use the social media. I mean, I'm a social media manager by trade. So why can't we just use the tools rather than be scared of it? Have a strategy. And even as a blogger, social media journalist, let's teach people how to visit Venice. Let's not talk just about the big things that happen in Venice. Let's talk about the small museum, the small little churches that nobody goes and visit, the good guides, the experiences can be done. You come with a family, good. What can you do in the city with children? Okay, don't just drag them along. There's so much that the city offers. There's so many tours, there's so many, you know, all different sort of things. And let's talk about writing lists. I'm fed up. I did it, but I'll stop doing it now. You know, 5 things to do in Venice, and they're always the same. Nobody that proposes different things, okay? Let's stop with this list. Let's give information. Let's convince people to read again, because that's the problem. The information is so short, you know, like that. Okay, you want to do a video, but it's got to be short because the attention span is short. Well, do it in a way, the way people want to know more, by either writing to the direct, you know, to the people interested, by reading more on books and so on. And then we need to get Venice to become a choice destination, not a must-have destination. Venice needs to come off the bucket list, okay? Enough. It's not one place that, oh, that's it, I took it off my list. It's got to be the place where I did 1 year research because I really wanted to go there, like it used to be in the old days. But I remember back in 2008, when I started doing my food tours, the people that I met, they used to be people that, you know, I always dream about coming to Venice. They used to, when I used to have my bed and breakfast, I had backpackers telling me what I should go and see in Venice, that even I didn't know there were things there, but you know, those things they were talking about. Now is all, okay, it's done. That's it. So it's just, this really, really bugs me a lot. Also because it involves the poor artisan so many times that people walk, have a look at the artisan, and then they walk out of the shop. They ask them 1,000 questions, and then they walk out of the shop. Yeah, that was very beautiful of you to go and visit the artisan, but why didn't you buy anything? He's got to pay bills like everybody else. You just spent half an hour in his shop asking him 1,000 questions. And what did he get out of it? Nothing. You just got his knowledge, but didn't give back nothing. So, you know, visiting a city should be give and take. So you take from me my knowledge, but I give you back something, at least economically, let's say. Okay, the role of a city authority, and then I will be finished. Right, unfortunately, like everybody else, I preaching probably to nobody, because unfortunately, what I'm gonna say, the authority are never gonna listen to, because unfortunately, I'm very frustrated as well, because I realize that they never answer their emails, or they simply dismiss any proposal that is given to them. But I think social media could be a great tool for the local authorities. They could identify the best prospective visitor and change the type of visitor that come to the city. That, you know, everybody was saying we need quality. Okay, how do you create quality? Well, you literally filter the people come to Venice, and that doesn't happen with, I think, gates and entry fees. You filter the people by simply showing what the city offers. I look at it and I think, okay, that's not for me, and I don't go. Fine, good. It meant maybe when you came here, you wouldn't have liked it anyway. So I think we need quality doesn't necessarily mean money, and it doesn't necessarily even mean education. It just means passion, in my opinion. But when you come to a city, you love the city and you're not going to use the city. We need to market the effort by traveler type. So if you do a video for a family, show what the family can do. If you do a video for older people, well, show the older people what they can do, and so on. So when people come, they know what the offer is there for them, and they will invest in the way. We need to increase the partnership with the right influencer. That doesn't mean just go and get the most famous influencer known. You need to get the right one, because if influencers got millions of followers, but they're all young kids, that's not the kind of people the Venice want, is it? I need to also get the right influencer to show the right people that this is the city for, and so on. We need to create short videos that explain the city, and they need to be short because unfortunately attention span now is gone. We need to share what's new, and I mean share it possibly with a long anticipation, not the day it happens or the day before it happens, because as Luisella probably agree with me later, we get to know things like 1 day in advance here. It will be nice to have, a system by which the news are spread in many languages, not just in Italian, with a little advance. And most of all, I think it's about time there should be a body that collaborates between different authorities, between the museums, between the hotels, between the restaurants, between the artisans, between the shopkeepers, somebody that we're all, me and Luisella agree on this, so we need to do a lot of networking. That is at the moment really lacking in Venice. And with this, I finished. That's it. Short and sweet, as they say. Okay.
Thank you, Monica, very much. I got some very clear messages from what you were saying. Do your homework before you come.
Absolutely.
Diversify. Don't just do the 5 things. And very fascinating from you, given your profession, the potential of social media. But anyway, we'll skip on to Luisella's presentation, if we may, immediately, and then we'll have our discussion and questions and debate. Luisella.
Thank you very much, everyone. And I will not waste any time on introducing myself. I'm just going to share my screen. Hopefully you will see what my computer looks like. And I will start trying to give some contribution to this very interesting conference, especially because I agree Venice is definitely a laboratory for the future of tourism, not just in Venice, but also abroad, somewhere else. I will talk about what happened during the pandemic lockdowns. Yes, I've been a tourist guide in Venice speaking English and German, starting in 2000. So what I can tell about my work is 22 years of experience with tourists, which sometimes, seems to be a word, but in fact, tourism means people. So this is a picture that, can you confirm you're looking, can you see my screen?
Yes, indeed.
Okay, perfect. So this is a photo a colleague of mine, Corinne Govi, took in a Carnival 2018. And this is exactly where you are, on top of the bridge of La Paglia, to view the to view the Bridge of Sighs and to view St. Mark's Square, just in case you had forgotten what it was before the pandemic. I just wanted to also highlight that there are some poor policemen in between that are trying to control the flow of people. What did it look like on the other side? This is the view of the Riva degli Schiavoni, still that day in Carnival 2018. And I want to tell immediately that when people tell me, well, I'm sure that you're sad because there are no tourists in Venice and you would like the situation to go back what it was, well, as a tourist guide, I tell you, no, this is not the kind of situation we get any professional work. In other words, when the city is so crowded, guides do not work, because the people that want a tourist guide to take them around immediately when learning Venice is crowded do not come. So tourism over tourism means less work for tourist guides. This is another picture, this one I took, it was in December 2020, so we were starting the lockdown. This is the Grand Canal, and I live in Venice, and I can tell Venice was absolutely magical during those times. It was magical, it was quiet, it was not loud, and it was, on the other side, very worrying. Now, is there anything in common between the photos I showed before the pandemic and during the pandemic? Well, I think there is. So the common thing about over-tourism and lack of tourism is that both situations were out of control. And I chose this picture, which I'm sure you know, it's from the Palazzo Alton in Rome. It's the Ludovisi battle sarcophagus. And it shows a fight between barbarians and Romans. Now, who are the civilized? Who are the barbarians? The residents usually consider tourists barbarians, but it's also true the opposite, that many tourists consider Venetians barbarians. I was looking at the chat before starting my presentation. I saw Val's comments. It's true. I mean, Venice is viewed as a city that rips you off. Venice is also a city where tourism brings the residents to behaviors that are not civilized. And I must say also that the barbarians are also the other tourists for the tourists. So one would say, okay, then we don't want tourism. Tourism is a bad thing. I loved when Van der Borg's comment was, we do not have to demonize tourism. This is a sentence I took from the Global Code of Ethics for Tourism, 2001. It's the UN World Tourism Organization, and it says, firmly believing that through the direct, spontaneous, and non-mediated contacts, it endangers between men and women of different cultures and lifestyles, tourism represents a vital force for peace. And the factor of friendship and understanding among the peoples of the world. At the same time, I found very interesting what Jean-Didier Urban says. He is an anthropologist, and he says, tourism is a remedy against xenophobia, but if not responsible, it generates conflicts. This is something obvious, but I just want to mention that 95% of the travelers concentrate on 5% of the planet. So it's not just the city of Venice, it's the problem with tourism in general. And what we understood during the pandemic is Venice was dying from tourism, but would die from lack of tourism. So what is there as an alternative? I remember very well, this is another picture I took during those times, just right now I would say tourism is coming already back, but what I felt during those times was terrible. I felt, wow, look, all the cultural places are closed. Museums, theaters, cinemas, schools were closed. Artists and artisans struggled to make a living. I talked to several artists, and they said during this moment of lack of everything, it feels as if we have no more scope in life. Tourist guides also could not work, and as you can tell also, the gondoliers, no one was free to travel. I must say that during that time, many tourist guides thought we should respect the grief. We should respect the mourning during the pandemic. It was tragedy happening every single day. But on the other side, we realized we could not wait till it was all over. I chose this wonderful painting by Giovanni Bellini, I'm sure you know. It's at the Accademia Galleries. And what I like about it is the fact that it's like an epiphany. Suddenly in the darkness there appears a ray of light and we see the beauty appearing. What I mean is that culture responds to a most intimate need of human beings to understand who we are, allows us to feel a universal communal feeling. Culture is the way to heal your soul and not to feel alone when tragic events one cannot justify take place. So what did I do? These are the photos that were taken during my live tours. I arranged webinars first, but then by the end of 2020, I started running live interactive tours of this kind. You can see on the left, when I went to visit Lino Tagliapietra's showroom in Murano, this is where you can see some of his amazing works, the spigoli tunghi vases. Lino was with me and we had this interview live online with all my call them clients, I call them guests. And then on the right, you see me showing the collection by Gabriele Bella in the Querini Stampalia Foundation. That was the very first museum that said, let's do it. This is me on the inside the Olivetti showroom. And that's me again. And that's enough of me, with the stabilizer with my phone just outside the Porta della Carta at the Doge's Palace in St. Mark's Square. This is the kind of very short video. Don't worry. If it doesn't work, let me know what it looks like when I do this filming live online.
Buongiorno everyone. We are in the district of Cannaregio, and as often in Venice, while you walk, then all of a sudden there appears a new perspective, a new viewpoint. We are at the very border of the city, its marginal parts, and here by the Ponte della Sacca, referring to the large water basin next door, we can have a wonderful view of the northern parts of the lagoon. In particular, you can see the graveyard island, St. Michael, and then also to the left, the white lighthouse of the island of Murano. The beauty this morning where the sun is really striking, we can see here to my right the Palazzo Contarin del Zaffo, hiding one of the most beautiful gardens in the city, Palazzo Minelli Spada with the large obelisks on top, and one of these straight, wide canals that are so typical of this part of Venice, Cannaregio.
I hope that you could hear. I'm not sure if I shared the sound, but anyway, my idea is that when I got contacted by the arts societies in the UK, I could start a different way of touring. So who would be my clients? I worked with hundreds of art societies in the UK and in the US, with universities, high schools, families, friends that lived across the different continents and not caring if they needed to wake up at 3 a.m. to see their friends and explore Venice together. What did I show? And this is the very important part. I took people around, even if I was physically here and they were not here, in walking tours in the hidden parts of Venice, or into, that's the very important part, into museums during the lockdown, libraries, artisans, workshops. So when the museums were closed and no one was getting in and no one was paying a ticket, I went in and all my guests were paying a virtual ticket to visit the place virtually. This is another picture I took. We are inside the Bridge of Sighs, and the question I put is, was it a makeshift? Was it something like an alternative? Well, no, it was just a completely new experience to travel. And live tours are very different from tours in person. They allow for slow, in-depth storytelling, focusing on details, and even if body language is missing, they are extremely interactive. So people do question, interact, write down what they think, or just interrupt me and talked to me. And many would also ask me, well, if you do a virtual tour, then you are not interested in a real visit. The picture you see, by the way, is coming from one of the books I showed at the Franciscan Library, San Francesco della Vigna. Well, the answer is no. Actually, on the contrary, many I virtually met are now coming. And they asked to see what they saw, which happens to be mostly places they did not know about before planning their trips. One last picture I took to almost finish my presentation is, will live tours continue after the pandemic? I would say that it will certainly, this kind of traveling, slow down, as the hope to get to normal times is present, even if news of the war in Ukraine is also already very frightening. So it may be that this will work for anyone that cannot travel. I'm talking about elderly people, disabled people, someone that cannot afford traveling, or just like a present. And also I think it would work to help people learn what they can see when coming to Venice. So just to finish, what can one learn from this experience? Online information is essential to prepare and educate future travelers. So this is something that Jan told, Monica also. You should provide future travelers with a large spectrum of several responsible tourism actors. What do I mean? I mean that we need definitely to understand that the information to give tourists must be available online and must be a network. So if people don't know there is fair B&B, if they don't know which restaurants are locally run, if they don't find all this information together with the list of licensed tourist guides or artisans, as in Venice Travel Original, to accessible tourism, then it does not work. And by the way, let's stop about talking about Venice only. It's the Veneto. You needed to make sure people know about other towns near Venice, because otherwise it will not work. This is my last slide. It's a provocation. What about if the ultimate way to be a responsible traveler were not to travel at all? Then live tours would be a way to travel with less environmental impact and social negative effects. But maybe that's just a provocation.
Well, thank you. I must say that you have achieved exactly what I hoped. The three of you have been so complementary to one another. It is important to be thinking about tourism, but it's also important to be doing it and reflecting back the experience in the way that Monica and Luisella have both so ably done. I learned a lot from my conversations with them, I can tell you, in Venice, and I've just noticed that somebody in the chat has spoken of having discovered Luisella and benefited greatly from that. So I wanted to ask all three of them while they were talking precisely how we can achieve this diversity that we all realize is important. I mean, there are many initiatives, aren't there? I thought the chorus group of churches was a very interesting idea, for example, but how do we do it without achieving I don't know, the impression that only rather well-educated people should be visiting Venice, for example. We can all discover Venice in special ways of our own if we have the right sort of help, I suppose. But Jan, what do you feel about bringing more diversity into the experience of tourism?
I think both other speakers were really clear about that, and they were talking not only about educating the visitors, but also and very much educating the people that are working in the tourism industry in Venice, many of them, and also the policymakers. And I think the idea is quite clear. If we look at the sort of the overall net footprint of visitors, it is not a question of only inviting the rich, and but to really try to see whether you can transform this, what we call business model in economics, to a business model that is actually sort of not thinking in terms of economies of scale, but economies of specialization, economies of quality. And therefore, maybe in the end, and that is something that I think we can actually explain to the tourism industry, if you have a sort of it's a bit arrogant and maybe but if you have the right kind of visitors to your place, you can maybe even make more money and have less social and environmental costs involved in everything. And again, it was some of the questions that were asked. I would really like to cite the definition of the United Nations World Tourism Organization that states tourism that takes full account of its current and future economic, social, and environmental impacts, addressing the needs of visitors, the industry, the environment, and the host communities. Now, I think the order of the words is very important because it actually sort of shows that there's still a lot of thinking going on in which the host community comes in the last place of the priorities. And I would like to change that. I would also advise the United Nations World Tourism Organization to start their sort of thinking, also in terms of the definition, addressing the needs of host communities, the visitors, and so forth. In other words, for me, that is the important shift in the actual paradigm that we should be trying to make. So quality in a very broad sense of the word, which might also mean students, backpackers that actually sort of live Venice in a mindful kind of manner. And I think both Luisella and Monica gave some very good examples of this new mindset that actually still has to be promoted further.
Didn't they? Indeed. Thank you. Thank you. So, Simon, are there questions or comments in the chat?
There are. I'm also aware that Anna has her hand up, but I'd like to just reference some of the questions that people have left. So, first of all, a while back, more of a comment from Val. I spent several years living in Venice while doing research for a book. I stopped my activities partly because I experienced hostility from many native Venetians who treated me like a day tripper. Venetians too should also be aware many of us willing to make positive contributions feel dissuaded. Then from Caroline Murray, since 2000, we've usually visited Venice twice a year for a week or so, staying in agency supplied apartments, which could otherwise be homes for native Venetians. Should we stay away? And then she links to a blog that she wrote about that. And there was a very nice response from Neil Robbins saying, use the fair.bnb co-op, which is dedicated to housing visitors in a way that benefits the community. A question to Jan. Who are the local stakeholders? Local stakeholders often don't share the same goals. Clashes between Venetians, brackets, a mercantile race, who profit from tourism and from those who don't. Likewise, clash between mainlanders, who are in the majority in terms of voters, and those who live in the historic centre and the islands. So that might be an interesting question if, Jan, you wanted to respond to that.
Well, let's deal with the first questions first. I saw both Luisella and also Monica nod about Airbnb and so forth, and then I can get back to this this last question.
Okay.
Is that okay?
Yeah, Luisella, Monica, did you want to respond to those points?
I'll leave it to Luisella because she knows what I feel about this part. She lives in Venice, I don't, so it could be a bit tricky.
Okay. Can you repeat the question precisely?
Yeah. So there's one question which was about feeling a visitor, but feeling that many Venetians were hostile, treated her like a day tripper. But also somebody saying twice a year, I've usually visited for a week or so, stayed in agency supplied apartments, but very aware that those might otherwise be homes for native Venetians. Should we stay away? And then the question to Jan was about who are the local stakeholders, given there are these different competing subsections of the stakeholders, the voters and the residents. So any thoughts on any of those?
That's exactly what I said. I mean, the fact is that when you have a conflictual situation, then everybody prefers to consider the other ones simple barbarians. and so it's not because people are bad, it's just that this situation creates conflict. And I mentioned the Airbnb because that's a solution. I remember visiting the UK many years ago as a student backpacking. And when I went to bed and breakfast, I saw people living in the place where I stayed. And so I knew that my little money was helping somebody stay in that place, which happened to be a source of income for somebody and helping them stay. Now, when we talk about bed and breakfast, we do not talk about this at all. So the fair B&B is a solution, because you know that you are helping somebody stay in the city, somebody that owns one apartment and is not a major agency that probably earns money and is not even located in Venice. So you definitely need to help somebody whose activity is bringing taxes also to the city of Venice, in a way bringing money to the city. The other thing that we talked about was, yes, I mean, more or less, I think I have answered the question without taking any time away from my colleagues.
Thank you. Jan, the stakeholders question.
I think this answer to some of the stuff that I've been talking about by Jane, telling us that indeed, in the end, if you sort of pursue the interests of the locals, whether it's local residents or local and smaller tourism enterprises, you also, in the end, are able to guarantee a highly qualitative kind of experience to the people that visit the place. I am very much convinced that some of these tensions between either people working in tourism and working with tourism, or those who are locals or non-locals, or tourists, visitors and inhabitants, some of these tensions are actually generated by the fact that there is, since years, a sort of a lack of a clear strategy by the public sector. And I'm saying this also because I've been doing some research on this, on the basis of the work of John Glasson of Oxford Brookes University in the past. It's a planner, a very interesting guy, by the way. He has retired just recently. And we have been interviewing Venetians, both within workers of the tourism industry, people on the mainland who had of course, a slightly different vision. But in the end, and the bottom line of let's say, the question, whose fault it is that actually tourism in Venice is not sustainable, in almost all cases, like in 90% of the answers, was the local public administration. And it was similar to what actually the people in Oxford were saying in the end. It was not the fact that tourists were bad, or Airbnb is bad, or low-cost airlines are bad, or the visitors are bad, or the inhabitants are treating you badly. But in the end, it was a insufficient amount of quality management or tourism policies from the local administration that were given actually the responsibility for a lot of these conflicts that were mentioned to persist in time. So I really think that we should be stopping to blame either parts of the tourism industry or visitors or Venetians that are rude to locals. I don't think that is the case. We should be seeing visitors, tourists, and locals as allies that actually have, for 90%, the same kind of interests. And if we can sort of meet those interests, then I think a large part of the over-tourism problem has been solved. So I would say, well, don't focus on all these kind of paradoxes and conflicts, but actually try to see whether by reversing the order in which you are serving your stakeholders, you can make a sort of win-win-win kind of game in which everybody is better off.
5 more minutes max, because we are going over time already, but it's been so interesting and worthwhile. Anna, would you like to make your point now? Do unmute yourself.
3 very quick ones. First of all, as Jan has just demonstrated, it is a problem of the authority. And fortunately, so far as tourism is concerned, in Venice, there isn't a multiplicity of authorities. There is actually the town council, and it has people who are responsible for its policies. Therefore, with a better town council, one could see great improvements. Secondly, there are a lot of shibboleths that get repeated again and again about Venice. And one is that if the number of people to Venice were to be limited, deliberately limited, it would turn Venice into Disneyland, to which a distinguished English economist said, ha, if Venice were being managed by Disneyland, it would be much better managed. Obviously a paradox. But it is now understood that there is excess demand for everything that is very highly prized. And in ecological tourism, it is absolutely standard to limit the number of people who can be in a place at any one time. It's not to say you can't come because you're not good enough, but simply you can't come this day because there are already too many people. The Galapagos Islands are one of them, Bhutan is another, and so on. And I think this concept is going to have to come to reality simply because the laissez-faire policies of the past will end, and with all kinds of digital management, it can be done. And at that point, all these wonderful, informative, educational programs can be read through to people. And then very important point you made, Jan, about the commons, the estimating what matters. Now, just a little fact. The barriers at the moment are raised when the water reaches 130 centimeters. I won't explain what that means, but let's take that figure in your head. St. Mark's Square floods at under 100 centimeters. Why is it being late? Why is it being raised so late? Why is there no plan to stop Venice from flooding completely? It is in order to allow the largest number of ships to get into the lagoon to the port at Porto Marghera, because it's a loss of money to the ship owners or the port if the ships have to wait outside the lagoon or are trapped inside the lagoon. Now, what does this mean? Which matters more, St. Mark's Basilica or the port of Marghera? It's not an easy question to answer, but at least it has to be discussed, and it is not being discussed honestly at present. So the estimation of what it is we're trying to do, you know, what is top of the list? That's it. Thank you.
Thank you. I'd just like to draw attention to a question from Courtney Fleming to you, Monica. I expect you've seen it, but
yes, but I can't remember it. Sorry, if you can read it again. I was prepared, but I was listening to everybody else. So.
Yes, we haven't really got time to go into it, but well, the question is there anything specific that the city could be doing to showcase Venetian-run businesses and experiences, or to give resident voices a more public platform? I think we'll have to leave it there because it is now 10 minutes beyond our allotted time.
Okay.
And some people will have checked in probably specifically to hear Salvatore Settis speak. But you are seeing the questions all right and might be able to respond to them by
chat.
responding.
Yeah.
Yes, exactly. Lovely. Thank you. So may I say a huge thank you to the three of you for being so complimentary to one another's presentations and giving us food for thought in large quantities. Obviously, we could spend the rest of the day on these issues, but we can't. But thank you very, very much indeed. It's been most enjoyable and stimulating. I've got lots of questions I dare not ask you now. Thank you.